On this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, it's the What the Ship edition, top maritime stories as of June 22nd, 2022. I'm your host, Sam Mercagliano, and welcome to this episode of What the Ship. So today we're going to do something a little bit different. Normally, I give you 5 top stories, run through them fairly quickly, and truck right along. But today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to look at 3 stories because there are 3 big stories that I think right now are emerging. We're going to take a little bit more time with each of them, extrapolate on them a little bit, talk about them, and as always, put them into the context of how these issues in global shipping impact you on a daily basis. Sorry. If you're new to the channel, please take a moment, subscribe, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. All right, let's jump into this week's stories. Our first story takes us to the White House and the signing of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 2022, the first piece of major maritime legislation signed in this country since 1998. Now, this bill, which is the Senate version, not the House version, was able to get through Congress and signed. You may remember we just did an episode where President Biden threatened to punch the CEOs and the shipping lines. I'm not sure if it's the CEOs or the ships. It wasn't unclear from Biden's speech. But anyway, he threatened to beat up the 9 shipping companies in a speech he gave in Los Angeles. All of that was in preparation for the passage of this bill. This story here on gCaptain is a Bloomberg story, and it covers most of the major issues. So Biden signed into law Senate Bill 3580, marking the first major change to federal regulations for international container shipping. This bill, the law will stop, quote, shipping companies taking advantage of American families, farmers, ranchers, and businesses, the president said at a signing ceremony for the broadly bipartisan measure, an indication of the White House's urgency to show voters it's trying to bring down prices, price increases stuck at a 4-decade high. They raked in the profits and the cost got passed on, as you might guess, directly to the consumer, he added, sticking it to the American families and businesses before they could. The shipping measure seeks to alleviate supply chain bottlenecks at sea that were exacerbated by a spike in demand during the pandemic. It directs the Federal Maritime Commission to prevent ocean carriers from unreasonably refusing to fill ocean cargo space with U.S. exports to investigate late fees charged by shippers. All right, time out. Number one, this bill does not do what the president is talking about. I'm sorry. It just doesn't. And this is, I think, one of the problems in the statements coming out about this bill. And I'm going to do a whole video that breaks down the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, what it exactly says, all the major provisions, and how it changes the existing legislation. It's going to be a much longer video than this. I just want to give you my take on this bill. So right off the bat, the president is alleging that the 9 shipping firms, and if you watch my videos, you know that I have been very hard on the 9 shipping firms for a variety of reasons. However, let's be clear about something. They are a product of our own making. The Shipping Act of 1984, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act of 1998 deregulated ocean shipping. We saw the decline, the demise of U.S. shipping firms, U.S. lines, and Sealand. And most importantly, we saw the consolidation of shipping lines into these big conglomerates. We saw it happen. But we also benefited from it for a decade, 2010s. We had ridiculously low ocean shipping rates. It was crazy. It cost almost nothing to ship things across the ocean. And now, yes, did they spike 1,000%? Is that because the ocean carriers maniacally wanted to raise the price? That was a great impression. I hope you enjoyed that. Did they want to do it because they wanted to nefariously take money? No, it was supply and demand. It was economics 101. It literally was. Because of the demand, because of what happened with COVID. And it's a very easy thing to explain what happened. When you hit your button on your phone and you order something from Amazon, that package has been moving for 120 days before you ever hit that button. And what COVID did was the normal flow of goods got disrupted because people weren't ordering what they normally order. And instead they started ordering other things. But nobody knew how long COVID was going to last. Oh, it'll be 6 weeks. It'll be 3 years. Nobody knew. And so what happened was you doubled up on the supply chain. Fortunately, there was slack in the system. There was a lot of excess of ship capacity out there. And so we piled more stuff onto ships. The problem is, while we built bigger ships, we didn't invest in the port infrastructures and the roads and the railways and the warehouses and the distribution centers. And we clogged the whole damn system up. And that's what caused the problem. And we're going to talk about what's happening right now because we're on the flip side of that right now. But the reason the Ocean Shipping Reform Act is important, I would argue, is this. Although it's not doing what President Biden said, it's not going to fix inflation. What it does do is this. Number one, it allows the Federal Maritime Commission to be more active in monitoring. One of the things that happened in those previous bills in 84 and 98 was reduce the power of the FMC. And I think that was a fundamental change. I also think the FMC never should have been split off from the Commerce Department or from the Maritime Administration. That was back in 61. But that's my own issue on that. But when he says things like this, one of the factors affecting price is this: 9 major shipping companies consolidated into 3 alliances, which the U.S. bought off on, by the way. Let me be clear. We approved that. The vast majority, mostly shipping in the world, and each of these 9 is foreign owned. During the pandemic, these carriers increased their prices by as much as 1,000%. All right. We have exported out shipping into these large corporations. But again, we had our own shipping firms. We allowed them to demise. One of the big 9 right now is HMM. It is basically owned by the Korean government. The Korean government bailed out HMM to make sure that they had a national shipping line. Costco is the Chinese overseas shipping company. It was bailed out, or it's not bailed out, but it's owned by the Chinese government. And these other firms, a lot of them have a lot of impact. Maersk is the biggest corporation in Denmark. Denmark is never going to allow Maersk to go under. Never. They won't. They won't. Even though Maersk has been sticking their thumb in Denmark's eyes. They've been removing Danish crews off vessels. They shifted their ship. They closed their big shipyard in Odense and moved their shipbuilding over to Korea back in the 2010s. They really haven't been great to Denmark in many ways. But again, this is the ocean shipping carriers. We bought into this deal. And now we're using this deal that we bought with them to get really low ocean shipping rates against them. And for obvious reasons, they're kind of reacting against this. And you see that in some of the statements here that's going in here. And I want to go on and read a couple of the statements here because they're great. Attempts to, quote, demonize ocean carriers are not only inaccurate, but dangerous because they undermine the ability to understand the root of U.S. supply chain problems, the World Shipping Council said in a statement. Now, the World Shipping Council represents all of the big ocean carriers, including the top 9. The statement goes on from the World Shipping Council. As long as American ports, rail yards, and warehouses remain overloaded and unable to cope with the increased trade levels, vessels will remain stuck outside ports to the detriment of importers as well as exporters. Ocean carriers continue to move record volumes of cargo for the country and have invested heavily in new capacity. Yes, they've invested heavily in ships, not in the port infrastructure. There's an important difference right there. America needs to make same commitment investment to its landside logistics infrastructure. I agree, World Shipping Council. You should pay for part of that too. If you build new ships, you should pay for part of the cranes, the dredging, the capacity that goes in it. Every time that they introduce new vessels, we, the port operators, which is the US government, which is actually the states and municipalities in the United States, have to deal with that. And understand the World Shipping Council has had some issues with this. If you go back here, the World Shipping Council, this is their response, which I'll include on gCaptain report on this. You know, they have a full statement where they went into it, and what I read for you was part of the excerpt from that. But I should also mention that way back when they were predicting that the Shipping Reform Act was doomed to fail. This is a John Gallagher story from August of 2021, where the World Shipping Council said, oh, this will never, ever happen. And you need to understand the World Shipping Council is made up, again, of those big corporations. This is their website. The co-chairs of the board are basically the CEOs of Hapag-Lloyd, Germany, and ONE, Ocean Network Express, that's Japan. Those are the leaders of the board. Then also on the board is the head of HMM, that's Korea. Randy Chen from Wanhai, this is Taiwan. Yang Min, that's Taiwan. Maersk, that's Danish. Crowley, that is American, along with Matson right there. Zim is Israeli. Express Pearl, I think Express Feed, excuse me, is I believe Singapore is where it's based, or maybe Belgium. I forget which one that is. Evergreen is Thailand. ICL, this is an independent carrier out of I think it's out of England or the Netherlands. Wallenius is Germany. CMA CGM is France. Swire is in Singapore. MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company. That's out of Italy and Switzerland, and Costco OOCL, that's China, mainland China. So as you see here, overwhelmingly, the World Shipping Council is made up of foreign firms with a few Americans thrown in there. And obviously they have an issue about it. But again, President Biden came in locked and loaded. The speech he gave back at LA was intended to fire people up. But there's no doubt that there are issues across the board that resulted in the high freight rates and, more importantly, the congestion at the ports. And I'll recommend a couple of things for you to look at a little bit more in depth here. So Lloyd's List came out with this story, and at Lloyd's, I have to say, and a few other of the news reporting agencies are very careful in what they say about this. They took a little bit of umbrage at President Biden's swing at the World Shipping Council and the big nine firms. But at the same time, too, their base, their readership is from those companies. So they got to be careful about what they say. However, James Baker here wrote a very interesting piece where he talks about this. And, he's pretty upfront with it, that this bill has got a lot of issues associated with it, not the least of which is many of the provisions don't go into effect for months or years at time. What it does do is give the Federal Maritime Commission oversight and more power to document, legislate, audit, and to look at what's going on with ocean shipping. I myself do not believe the ocean carriers manipulated freight rates over the past 2 years. However, going forward, they like these profits. They've made more profits in a single year in 2021 than they did in the entire decade of 2010. They're not going to want to go back to the way things were. They're going to want to keep those profits high, and they're going to do that by blank sailing vessels, canceling the sailing of vessels, and manipulating the system to keep the freight rates high. And that is a problem if they collude with other shipping firms to set prices. And that is antitrust. That is an issue. And one of the things that really needs to be looked at more so than the Ocean Shipping Reform Act is that this act gives the FMC more investigative power, but more importantly, they have a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice can prosecute antitrust cases, which had been done back in 2017 against the ocean carriers. It was dismissed in 2019, but that is looming out there. The other thing I'll have you look at is this. Lloyd's List does a podcast, and they interviewed both the chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, Daniel Maffei, and then the CEO of the World Shipping Council, John Butler. Again, I'm going to do a whole episode just on this topic and take a look at it. But in that interview of those two on that podcast, they really go a little bit more in depth on their issues. It's interesting. John Butler at the World Shipping Council is a lot less attacking of the Ocean Reform Act because it's law. And now he's trying to live with it, which is basically, I could have told him that. What I think the World Shipping Council misses every time is they fail to laud the fact that ocean carriers kept freight moving throughout the pandemic, something that was not done in other sectors. And I think that is an important element. We know we owe a lot to the mariners, to the longshoremen, truckers, rail, everybody who kept everything flowing for us, while some of us just sat at home in the middle of lockdowns. And I think that's really, really important. However, the ocean shipping carriers need to be aware that the US government, the Federal Maritime Commission, is going to be watching them more. And there needs to be more data sharing. There needs to be more rhyme and reason to the detention and demurrage of containers, and for the ability of people to get out their exports. If there was one groups that came out in wholehearted support of this bill, it was agriculture, it was retail, it was exporters, because they are frustrated that they can't get their goods out of the United States overseas, especially agriculture, where we're seeing shortages right now in grain because of the Russia-Ukraine war, because of heat waves in India. There's going to be a global food issue, and we cannot get food out of this country. And it was best demonstrated a few months ago when McDonald's had to hire Flexport to charter 3 747s to fly potatoes to Japan to be made into small fries at McDonald's. That is a classic example of that. And we need to be able to do it. Unfortunately, our exports have not gone up, but have gone down. And the number of empty containers being shipped out of the United States has increased, not decreased. All right, jump over to the second story. Story two takes us to the Black Sea. Uh, Massive developments going on, obviously, in the Russia-Ukraine war. One of the things we're beginning to understand here is that this war is going to be going on for a while. This is going to be a grind. This is not going to be over by, a couple of weeks, which many people said right from the very beginning, but people don't like to hear it. But one of the things we're seeing right now is this continued development of the blockade of Ukrainian ports and the inability to get out grain. If you look at, again, the map here from our buddies at Marine Traffic, one of the things you begin to see here is how important the Black Sea is, particularly to Russia. You're starting to see ships kick on their AIS as they transit here across the Sea of Azov. With the capture of Mariupol here on the northern shore, now ships can freely move. This is a big objective of Russia, a huge win for them, that their shipping that comes out of the Rostov, off the Don River, off the Caspian Sea, all the way into the interior. Again, if you look at Russia and you look at where ships go, you see this line of ships all the way up into central Russia, all the way up here toward Finland, the White Sea, to the Baltic. It is absolutely crucial for Russia to have access. And one of those accesses that was denied to them or could be interdicted was the Sea of Azov, the Don River and the Caspian Sea and the Volga Canal. All of that was jammed up here by the Ukrainians potentially. It's one of the reasons why we've seen Russia slowly take over the Black Sea. They invaded northern Georgia in 2008. They took the Crimea in 2014, and now in 22, the northern coast of the Sea of Azov. And they have also basically interdicted the Gulf of Odessa. Russian forces are about halfway across the Gulf of Odessa. They're in the city of Kherson right here, and they have blocked off that area. The ports here are shut. But one of the things we're beginning to see is this escalation. Again, when you zoom in here and we talk about this importance of these ships, you see this mass anchorage here off the Danube River, the border between Romania and Ukraine. And these vessels are going to the ports of Izmail, to Remy, and loading grain and coming out. These are huge targets right here, just 15 miles from Snake Island. And then here are the oil platforms that the Russians are using as observation posts to ensure the blockade of the Gulf of Odessa. And if you just look at the archives of gCaptain, I just did the Ukrainian, Russia's invasion Ukraine archive. I just pulled this up. Their hashtag for this was Ukrainian crisis. You see right here the stories that are going. Turkish team said to discuss Black Sea grain corridor in Russia this week. So Turkey is negotiating with Russia quite a bit to open up the grain corridor. They want to see that movement of grain out. The port of Odessa came under a missile attack as Russians advance in Ukraine. That, by the way, coincided with this story down here. Ukrainian strikes Crimean Black Sea drilling platforms. Pro-Russian regional head says this is not the Russian platform, by the way. This is a huge platform. It's not; those are not what the Russians have in the in the Gulf of Odessa. But here you see that kind of tit for tat. The Ukrainians are hitting the Russian platforms. The Russians are hitting Odessa. Then this story, really interesting one. Russia wants NATO member Lithuania, warns NATO member Lithuania over Kaliningrad transit of goods. Come on back up here to marine traffic. Russia has a little detached portion of itself at a place called Kaliningrad right here. This is Kaliningrad. And to get goods to Kaliningrad, you have to go out through Belarus, through Lithuania in there. And if Russia cannot get overland route into Kaliningrad, that becomes a big problem. And we see that basically Lithuania is making it difficult for Russia to do it because of the sanctions. Go on down here. EU seeks to release Ukrainian grain stuck to Russia's sea blockade. Understand this Russian grain is absolutely essential, even though it's a small portion of the total amount of grain grown in the world. Yes, it's 0.9% of total grain. When you look at Russian and Ukrainian grain in terms of exports, that's 25% of the world's exports. And that grain has to get to Africa, has to get to the Middle East, has to get to South Asia, and it's not. And the problem is there's no relief, there's no substitute coming in for this. And what we're seeing is this massive increase in escalation. We saw Odessa hit, we saw the platforms hit. Here, Ukraine strikes a Russian naval tug with Harpoon missiles supplied by the West. That's going to go over great. At the same time, you see this story from June 16th. Russia says it's assisting exports of Ukrainian foodstuffs via the Azov Sea. Yes, Russia is exporting Ukrainian grain in their ships and getting the money for it. Now, we keep hearing that Russia's offering safe passage, as you see here. Well, the problem is nobody has the guarantee that Russia will do that. Plus, it's going to be very difficult to insure vessels and ensure they're not going to run into floating free mines. Meanwhile, bottlenecks are forming in Poland and Romania as grain comes out. You just can't move the volume of grain by rail and by truck. You have to do it by sea. And this whole story, and again, this is just this week's looking at this, you can see how the issue of mining and how the issue of grain, the role of Turkey, the International Maritime Organization are all taking an active role in this. And again, the Black Sea becomes critically important. I know it's on no one's radar. No one thinks about the Black Sea. However, it is the cul-de-sac of the Mediterranean. And more importantly, you're seeing Central Europe, northern Ukraine, Western Russia, all these areas dump into the Black Sea, and the Black Sea dumps into the Mediterranean. And what we're seeing right now is a lot of contention over grain. At the same time, and I include it in this story because I'm working on another video that does solely on this, dealing with Russian oil. Russian oil is exporting at large measures. I just did a video on freight waves, myself, Greg Miller, talking about Russian oil. I'll include the link in the show notes so you can see it. And what we talked about is how Russia is trying to get that oil out. Even though there's a lot of quote unquote sanctions against it, Russia is doing a lot to avoid it. One of the big things that we thought was going to stop Russian oil getting out was they yanked insurance for their national fleet, what's called Sovcomflot. It's their fleet. And what the Russians have done is self-insured. They're providing their own insurance. And so they're getting around that. And Russian oil is being transferred to other tankers to hide its place of origin so that it can be sold on the open market. The Russians are doing a lot. They learned a lot from what the Iranians and Venezuelans have been doing to get around US sanctions. And now the Russians are doing it. And matter of fact, if you look at Russian oil now, it's gone down in its exports to Europe, but it's increased in its exports to places like Africa, India, and China. And most importantly of all, it has shored up the ruble. Everybody was talking about how the ruble collapsed. Well, the ruble is stronger than before because they're requiring that much of this oil be bought in rubles, and that is just shoring up the Russian currency. And so when you start thinking about oil coming out of the Black Sea, out of Central Asia, what we thought we were going to see, which was a decrease in oil come out, we're actually seeing an increase of oil come out. So, but we'll deal with that in another story. All right, that was story number 2. Let's go to our last story, story number 3 for this week. So our third story deals with maritime trade and the impact it's having, or really the collision it's having with the economic looming recession that we're seeing on the horizon. This article from Craig Fuller, CEO at FreightWaves, is a really interesting read. Again, I heartily recommend. Every time I put an article up here, these are the ones I really recommend you dig down into and take a look at it. Freight carriers across all modes should brace for weaker conditions in the coming months. Subject supply chains are experiencing a massive bullwhip from the COVID economy and have built up massive inventory levels. A slowdown in consumer spending caused by inflation and a potential recession will have a massive impact on freight demand and prolong an inventory drawdown. As we look at the pandemic through the rearview mirror, the economy is shifting to a new phase. While the United States is currently experiencing full employment, American consumers are incredibly stressed about the state of the economy and personal financial security. Inflation, crashing stock markets, higher interest rates, and economy uncertainty are sapping any confidence the full employment should offer. For supply chains, the consumer pullback came at a worse time. The bullwhip effect has created a massive overstock of inventories and wreaked havoc on global supply chains as companies try to recover from the pandemic recovery. So this bullwhip effect, and it's a common term, they use it all the time. And what they're using is, as Craig says here, is a scenario in which temporary surges in retail demand are magnified and exaggerated by upstream manufacturers and supplies who rapidly increase production well beyond the level that can be supported by consumers. So go back to what I talked about earlier. So one of the things I talked about in an earlier element here was the issue that during the beginning of COVID back in 2020, all of a sudden our buying habits changed. People were out and about, they were in a consumer retail economy, then all of a sudden everybody's at home. So people were buying, office furniture and all these weird things that we started buying being at home. Well, now we're in a mixed economy. One of the big issues going on right now is how many people are working at home. You've got Tesla arguing about getting everybody back to work. Same thing at Twitter. Meanwhile, a lot of economies are not sure. And so what retailers did and production managers did and everybody else did was, again, double their bets. Keep flowing the goods I would have in a pre-COVID environment and keep sending me the goods in a COVID environment. Because, hey, we got the capacity on the ships. Let's keep moving it. And they did. The problem we got now is the warehouses are jamming up again, except this time they're jamming up because there's too much goods coming in because we don't know what the economy is going to do. And on top of that, with increased fuel costs exasperated over the past year, add to it Russia, Ukraine on top of that, and this massive inflation we're starting to see, all of a sudden people are buying less, which means from the ports to the warehouses is where the congestion is happening. We're seeing it jam up. And when you jam it up like that, it's very hard to move cargo efficiently. And understand this is going to have a problem down the road. Craig Fuller over at FreightWaves and some other groups have been having this little fight about this issue because when you look at some of the issues, for example, and even on FreightWaves they have it, they talk about this story here, Greg Miller, Los Angeles port, peak season coming soon, strong imports ahead. Yes, third quarter is always the peak season. You're going to see the biggest shipments come across. Port of Long Beach sets record, but East and Gulf Coast ports are higher. That's Kim Willis with this. Georgia port, Savannah, reached all-time record in May. It's got a huge backlog off of Savannah right now. Massive ships waiting to get in. That was that issue we brought up with Maersk going aground, why that was such a big issue. So on one hand, FreightWaves is sitting there saying, okay, here's Craig talking about the fact that we're hitting this bullwhip, this economic recession. And at the same time, his reporters are saying, but container levels at a high level. But that is explainable by that issue. 120 days to order goods. These are the goods arriving now are coming from pre-inflation spike coming in. And plus you're ordering double amounts of goods because you're ordering for pre-COVID and COVID. Because we don't know if we're post-COVID yet. We really don't, because we keep worrying about Omicron, the next outbreak. We're still not 100% sure. The Spanish flu took 3 years to run its course. Probably the best analogy we have. And so what you see right now are these jammed yards. Port of Savannah, you can see the amount of congestion in the Port of Savannah. Now, some of these ports have been better able to handle it through the use of pop-up yards and off sites. LA and Long Beach have not been efficient about that, but Savannah, New York, New Jersey have. The other issue you have here, which is a really important one that I don't think is getting the attention that needs to be done here. This is the Lorianne LaRocco story. This is using the CNBC heat map to discuss supply chains. And one of the things she shows here is where there are issues, total issues, moderate congestion, Oakland, Savannah, Houston. I want to talk about Savannah and Houston. Why is there congestion in Savannah and Houston? If you look at the anchorage to berth average, it's very high congestion. Why is Savannah and Houston having the backlog? Right now, LA and Long Beach are about 20 ships waiting to get in. So substantially down, but still significant. But Savannah, much more significant. Why is that happening? Very easy to explain. It goes with another series of stories that are out there about congestion in European yards. European yards are seeing massive backlogs right now. Why are there backlogs in European yards, in East Coast yards, and Gulf Coast yards? Very simple. Shippers realized going to LA Long Beach and Oakland is a problem. Nobody wants to do it because of the congestion involved. There's just too much. One of the things that the president never mentioned when he was in the port of LA is how LA is the 380th ranked port in the world out of 380. That's a problem. Or 370 out of 370. That's a problem. Long Beach is 369. Our ports are not efficient. They're not moving cargo well. That's a big problem. And so what shippers have done is two things. One, they've routed cargo onto neo-Panamax vessels that can use the new lane of the Panama Canal, ships like Everforward. They can go through the Panama Canal and then hit the East Coast and Gulf Coast of the United States. And then the other way is going not eastward to the United States from Asia, but westward. They put them on the big 24,000 box ships, Everalot, the biggest ship in the world, just came out of Felixstowe. You load that ship, not all those, when you have a dozen, like HMM does, of those vessels, all those boxes aren't going to Europe. Europe isn't buying all that stuff. But what they're doing is going into ports in Europe and then being transloaded onto vessels like, for example, Mer Surabaya, which then comes to the United States. Because sailing from Shanghai to the east coast of the United States, whether you go through the Panama Canal or the Suez Canal, is about an even split. And to tell you the truth, ocean carriers right now rather go through the Suez than the Panama Canal. Panama Canal's got about a week delay to go through the Neo-Panamax lane. We're coming in the summer. There's slowdowns in that lane because of global warming. The lake level goes down. There's about a week delay sometimes waiting to get through the Neo-Panamax lane because it's a single lane. There's one lane to accommodate these vessels. And going through the locks, the 3 sets of locks on the southern side, the 3 sets of locks on the northern side, only one ship at a time can do it. So or it's one way during that time. They'd much rather go through the Suez Canal, where you can put a lot more ships through the Suez Canal because there's no locks, no constraints. And the Egyptians have advertised that they have upped the amount of vessels they can handle from 50 up to 90, and they are moving vessels through the Suez Canal. And so a lot of that congestion that's occurring in the European ports is, yes, they're not clearing the cargo out of those ports to go into the interior of Europe. At the same time, they're transloading, taking containers off the big ultra large container vessels and shifting them to vessels that are going to the East Coast, Gulf Coast of the United States. And the reason people are doing that is because they didn't want to get caught in LA and Long Beach again. They didn't want to be in that congestion. And so they're avoiding it. And more importantly, the bulk of the population of the US is on the eastern side, not the western side. And shippers have developed new warehouses, new distribution centers, new avenues to do it. Sam Ruda, the outgoing director of the Port of New York and New Jersey, in an interview he did with FreightWaves, talked about the fact that, yes, actively we are seeing shippers come to us and rerouting vessels to us. There are new routes coming in. Boston, Baltimore are getting these new express routes right to them. And so we're seeing a lot more cargo come to the East Coast and the West Coast. So the gauge of LA and Long Beach is not the right measure anymore. We need to be looking at all the ports. And while we expect the container volume to begin to slack, the problem is we're coming in the end of the year, and that's when the holiday season starts. And so people are going to be shipping in their seasonal stuff. And yes, we're on the potential of an economic recession, as Craig says, but you still need to keep cargo moving. The worst case scenario here is goods that are time sensitive are going to get caught in this congestion and not be able to move. And that's where you can start seeing freight rates, which have been declining. They're coming down. And if you look at the graph and all the indices, they're coming down. They're still high, way above pre-COVID levels, but they are coming down. But we're coming down the backside of Everest, which is as dangerous as going up the front side of Everest. And the problem is if it plateaus about halfway, if we keep freight rates around, $6,000 to $10,000, that's substantially higher than $1,500 to $2,500 we had pre-COVID. And more importantly, what we're going to see is shipping companies begin to cut back on some of their sailings, start retiring vessels. That overcapacity of ships that we have, almost no container ships have been scrapped so far in 2022. That's going to change. They're going to start bleeding tonnage here soon. They're going to run them aground in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Turkey and start scrapping like crazy. And you're going to start seeing some more consolidations. There's already talk about SM lines acquiring HMM. Expect to see some movement among the carriers in the alliances. There is so much going on that we need to keep an eye on. And ocean shipping is just one of those variables in a larger issue of everything. And I think when the president gets out and blames the ocean carriers for inflation, there are so many other factors at play there. That's a little disingenuous at times to do that. But at the same time, I think the World Shipping Council, which came out and attacked the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, need to understand that the Wild Wild West days of shipping are probably beginning to recede. And there's going to be more oversight as they consolidate more. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I know it was a lot, but I wanted to focus on those 3 stories because I think those are the 3 most important stories going on right now in ocean shipping. If you enjoyed today's video, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, give it a thumbs up, share it across social media, and if you can, Support the page either by hitting the super thanks button below and contributing to the channel, or going over to our Patreon page and becoming a patron. Patrons allow us to bring this news to you, and it allows me not to teach summer school, which I am greatly appreciative of all the time. I'll be heading down to Wilmington, North Carolina today for the North American Society of Oceanic Histories Conference. I'm going to try to get a video out here by Friday or Saturday, but we'll be back to normal schedule come next week. Until then, this is Sal signing off.